Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of May 2022. This month I read 6 books and I also DNF'd 1. That was a total of 1,791 pages. Did not count what I read of the DNF in that total. And my average star rating was 3.5 stars out of 5. I was kind of disappointed when I saw how few pages I actually read, though looking back on how my year is going, this was actually the second most productive reading month I've had. Only 1 month did I read more pages. I've just been a little off my game this year. I think I had a bad January and I have not been able to recover yet, but that's okay. I have read some really enjoyable books this year. Let's talk about what I read in May. So, the first book that I read this month was A Tip for the Hangman by Allison Epstein. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. This is a historical thriller that follows Christopher Marlowe as the main character. While he is studying in university, Kit is recruited by Queen Elizabeth I's spy master, and so he is tasked with spying on the imprisoned Mary Queen of Scots to determine if she is plotting against the Queen. Things go from there, and there's also a same-sex romance in this book between Kit and Tom, who is a friend of his at school that he has secretly been in love with for quite some time. What you may or may not know is that historians do believe that the real Kit Marlowe might have worked as a spy, and some believe that he may have been recruited while he was still at Cambridge, because if you look back on his time there, he seems to have been getting money all of a sudden from somewhere. People don't know exactly where the money was coming from, and I believe it was Walshingham, or maybe it was someone else, actually wrote to Cambridge saying they should let Marlowe graduate even though he had been missing some courses. So people believe, well, why would Her Majesty's advisors intercede on his behalf to make sure he graduates? Maybe because the reason he was missing classes was because he was working for them. And the real Kit Marlowe did also die very mysteriously, and what exactly happened there is still debated to this day. I think this book had an amazing premise, and it was really interesting to read about this particular aspect of Marlowe's life and what could have potentially happened. The author has an author's note in the back discussing what was truth and what she embellished, so that was also really interesting to read to get a better idea. I think, though, this book crammed a lot into approximately 350 pages. I kind of wish that this book had been longer, because the plot of A Tip for the Hangman begins when Marlowe is first recruited at Cambridge and continues all the way to his untimely death. And I feel like that was a lot of plot for what's a fairly short book. I do think the author had really great ideas and the premise was super interesting. When I was reading this, I was thinking that it would be super fun as a movie or a television adaptation. I think this could make a really interesting period drama, film, or television show. So ultimately, this book was just okay for me, but I'm glad that I gave it a try. Next, I read The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This book was so much fun to read. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. This is a murder mystery told in a mixed media format. So there is this theater troupe in this small British town called Lockwood, and they are putting on a production of All My Sons, and you find out that during this production, a member of the group was murdered, and another person has already been sent to prison for the crime. However, it is possible that they are actually innocent, so these 2 law students, Charlotte and Femi, are given files pertaining to the case by their boss and asked to find evidence to unmask the real killer. So you are basically in Charlotte and Femi's shoes, going through this mixed media, mostly emails between different members of this group, and you're trying to figure out who is the killer. You also don't know at the beginning who it was that was murdered. I will say I think it was pretty obvious who the murder victim was going to be. I predicted it very early on. However, The identity of the killer, I believe I did not guess correctly. I think there were some things that I got right. However, who actually committed the murder, I didn't know. While I was reading this book, pretty early on, I started taking notes to keep track of the information. I obviously can't show you my notes because they are filled with spoilers, but there were a lot of characters and there was a lot of information, so I was putting on my detective hat, okay? I was taking notes to try to get the timeline straight, and I noticed a lot of the times maybe character A would say X and character B would say Y, and I would be like, well, X and Y can't both be true because it's not adding up. So one of them is either mistaken or lying, and so I was keeping very detailed notes on things like that. If you're looking for a book that you can try to play along with the mystery and try to solve it, this is perfect for that. There were some people who did not like this book, and the main complaint I saw from people who didn't like it is they thought it was boring or slow. I personally did not feel that way. I was engrossed pretty early on and really invested in trying to figure out who the murderer was. However, I definitely think this is a mystery and not a thriller. If you're someone who needs books that are very fast-paced and have a lot of action, you're going to hate this book because it doesn't have a lot of action. It's really just building up your anticipation, kind of assembling all the clues. It is a mystery, it is not a thriller. There were some twists and turns that I did successfully predict. However, the identity of the killer was not who I thought it was going to be. So while I did get a lot of things right, the big reveal I got wrong. I think my biggest issue with this book is how the mixed media format is executed. Most of the correspondence you're reading in this book consists of emails, and sometimes to me it just felt a little awkward because characters were emailing each other things that in real life would have been a text, so I don't really know why Janice Hallett used so many emails when texts would have made more sense. Overall, I thought this book was a lot of fun, and I just devoured it because I really wanted to know who the killer was. I was very invested. I also loved the last chapter of this book. It was chilling and just, I think, a great note to end on. So all in all, I really enjoyed this book. If you're looking for a mystery you can attempt to solve, read this book for sure. Now it's time to talk about my DNF. That was A Tyranny of Petticoats, 15 Stories of Belles, Bank Robbers, and Other Badass Girls, edited by Jessica Spotswood. This is a young adult historical fiction anthology. It's a collection of short stories following young women in American history. I read, I think, 3 or 4 of the stories, and I decided I wanted to DNF it, not because I was absolutely hating it, but just because every story that I read was just average to me, and considering how little I've read this year compared to years past and how much I've been struggling with reading, I didn't want to invest my time in something that was probably just going to be an unmemorable read for me personally. I would probably recommend this book to someone in the 12 to 14 age range. I think it would be a really good introduction to historical fiction and different aspects of American history. The stories are very diverse, following women from different walks of life and in different areas of the United States throughout its history. So I think if there was a younger reader in your life who you wanted to introduce into historical fiction, this could be a good starting point. However, for me as a 23-year-old who reads a lot of historical fiction, I just felt like the stories were just okay. There were good ideas there, but I wanted a little more. I also think I've never read a short story collection that I really gave more than 3 stars anyway. They're not something I typically love, so maybe if you're someone who is a huge anthology lover, this would be better for you. I just wasn't feeling it, so I decided to DNF it. Then I read Death in the Family by Tessa Weigert. This was a 3-star book for me. It was okay. To be honest, I wish I had taken some notes after reading this book because I'm already forgetting a lot about it. I think for me, this was just an average mystery. I don't regret reading it, but it's not something that's gonna stick with me. This book is the first in a series following Detective Shanna Merchant, and Shanna used to work for the NYPD. However, she has now moved to upstate New York, where her fiance is from. She was on leave for a long time because we find out there was a traumatic experience in her past where she was held hostage by a serial killer, and she's still struggling with that and the trauma that she went through. She's now trying to go back to work at this small police department, and her new partner, Tim Wellington, are called to a private island owned by this very wealthy family. I think their names were the Sinclairs? The Sinclair family? I already forget what the family's last name is. Goodness, I think it was Sinclair, but I'm not sure. So basically, one of the Sinclair grandchildren has disappeared. His fiance woke up to find his half of the bed covered in blood, but he is nowhere to be found. So what happened to him? Has he been killed? It's a super interesting premise, and there is this isolated setting with the two detectives being trapped on this private island. They are stuck there with this wealthy family, one of whom is probably a murderer, and due to storms, they're unable to get back to the mainland or get any backup. So it definitely has that isolated, sort of claustrophobic setting. I think, though, I just wanted more from this. I think the mystery was fine, but it wasn't as exciting as it could have been. I think that the family members were all pretty one-dimensional characters. They were really just bad rich people cliches, I think. I wanted a little more from the characterization. And I also think, considering this is the first in a series, I wish that the author had told me more about Shanna and Tim, considering they're the two main detectives in this series, and I feel like I really didn't get to know them that well. I feel like they didn't have very well-developed personalities. Tim, in particular, he's like barely in the book. Basically what happens is Shanna will take members of the family to interview them, and she just leaves Tim behind to watch the rest of them. So while she's interviewing all the suspects, he's not even there. He's just like the muscle. It was weird. Ultimately, I thought this book was just very average. It had a really interesting sounding premise that it just didn't quite deliver on. There was nothing awful about it, but I was not invested. There are two other books in this series so far, which I believe are called Dead Season and Dead Wind, if I'm not mistaken, and I probably won't be reading those. If I'm being honest with myself, I just don't see myself feeling motivated to pick them up in the future. There are so many other books I think I would rather read. So while this book wasn't bad, it was just very average. Finally, I read 3 Agatha Christie books. I will link the vlog where I read these, so I'm not going to talk about them in too much detail. If you want my very detailed thoughts, go watch that vlog. First, I read The Secret of Chimneys, which was 4 stars for me. This is one of the Superintendent Battle books, and it leans a little more into the thriller side, and the plot of this book is really hard to summarize because there's a lot going on. Basically, we follow a bunch of characters at this estate called Chimneys, where a visiting prince is murdered. I think that's the easiest way I can summarize the plot. And a lot of other stuff happens too, but I feel like I'm just gonna leave it there because it'll be confusing otherwise. One Was the suspension of disbelief with this one a little bit high? Yes, but I really enjoyed myself. I think the characters were very fun and the writing was clever. There were parts that legitimately made me laugh. I think this was such a fun book to read and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I read The Big Four, which is a Poirot novel. This is another thriller by Christie, and I really did not like this one. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I think this book lacked the charm that I have come to expect from Christie, and it was just a really weird situation to find Poirot in. Poirot usually investigates more, you know, country house mysteries, small town murders, that sort of thing. And this book follows Poirot attempting to take down an international crime syndicate. It was very, very weird. There were times where Poirot was acting like James Bond. It was very jarring. This book was also originally published in a serialized format, and because of that, the plot felt very disjointed. It's really just a string of seemingly unrelated incidents that all then end up being connected to the Big Four. And I just felt like this was a really weird book. It was so tonally different from Christie's other books, and I just did not enjoy myself reading this one. I think it's probably one of my least favorite out of all the Christie books that I've read so far. I can't think of another one that I've really disliked like this. Yeah, and it's definitely my least favorite Poirot that I've read so far. And lastly, I read The Secret Adversary. This is the first of the Tommy and Tuppence mysteries. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I wasn't really sure what to rate it because I do recognize it has objective flaws, and I didn't want to give it a full 5 stars in the end because I don't think this book is on the same level as something like And Then There Were None, which was, you know, 5 stars, one of my favorite books ever. However, I wanted to give it the 4.5 because I think I enjoyed this book more than, say, The Secret of Chimneys or the other Christie books that I've given 4 stars. So I figured a 4.5 star rating was fair. In this book, we meet Tommy and Tuppence, who are childhood best friends reconnecting after World War I. They both need income, so they decide that the two of them are going to work together and start their own business. It's not entirely a private detective agency. I don't know exactly what you would call it. Basically, they start their own business called the Young Adventurers, saying that people can hire them to go anywhere or do anything if the price is right. And their first case ends up being a case involving British intelligence and international intrigue. I adored the characters of Tommy and Tuppence. I thought they were so fun to read about, and I also really enjoy the two of them together. Again, the suspension of disbelief with this book was a little bit high. It's another Christie that leans more into the thriller aspects, so there were some things that maybe realistically wouldn't have played out that way. However, I found the characters really enjoyable, and I think the writing had more of that trademark Christie wit that I enjoy. I think maybe part of the reason I enjoyed this book so much was because I had just read The Big Four before this one, and so this book was really what I needed in that moment after reading a book that I did not enjoy. So those were all the books that I read in the month of May 2022. Have you read any of these books? If so, do let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. My social media links are in the description if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a big thumbs up if you did, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lively rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!